Hello, friends. This is the lecture preparation for the fifth Sunday in Ordinary Time, February 4th, 2018. We begin with a reading from the book of Job. I am on page 54 in the lector workbook, and you're welcome to read along with me. Most people know of Job, a man afflicted by extreme sufferings, described in the opening scenes of the book. There we learn of Job's suffering came about because Satan, the adversary, protested that Job was righteous only because he was prosperous in every way. If his fortune were reversed, surely Job would curse God. Let him suffer and see what happens. As Job's friends see his horrendous change of fortune, they give lengthy explanations for the cause, which only amplifies Job's suffering. The long complaint we hear in today's reading is, in part, Job's response to his friend Eliphaz, who suggested that Job must have brought the suffering upon himself. It's God's way of punishing and disciplining the guilty Job. In reply, Job looks at the plight of all humanity as little more than the life of a hireling or a slave, although he addresses his agonized complaint to the pompous Eliphaz. Job is really speaking so that God will know that Job is innocent. Days, months, nights, dawn. With time-focused terminology, Job laments that there's no moment in which he can be free from his agony. His inescapable troubles have simply been assigned and allotted to him. He doesn't need to say who has done the assigning. It is only God who has such power. Even in the vigorous complaint in today's reading, Job does not curse God. Like lamenters in the Psalms, Job pours out his agony before God. Job's anguish and the unsatisfactory lectures of his friends are attempts from God's wisdom's tradition to find reason for human suffering, for which they find no easy explanation. I think we can all relate to Job at one time or another. We all feel really stressed out and somehow maybe punished, and that's not really what it is. So some of the notes over to the side. This is an exhortatory reading, and definitely not good news. Don't be afraid to fully express Job's misery and hopelessness. Use the same energy you'd use for any exhortatory reading. Make sure you pronounce Job and not Job. I don't want to make a big deal of it, but I have heard it done. So when you're asking this question, the first one, is not man's life on earth a drudgery? It's as if you are saying, don't you agree? Use care not to drop off your sentence at the end of these lines. In other words, don't say, is not life's man on earth a drudgery? No, you're asking a question. Don't you agree? Isn't it drudgery? Are not his days those of hirelings? And then it goes on. It encourages you to not let your intensity fade. There's a tinge of anger that drives this entire lament. Quicken the pace to convey restlessness. I am filled with restlessness until dawn. Emphasize the images of the shuttle and the wind, slowly and wistful melancholy. My days are swifter than the weaver's shuttle. What you could do with that actually is emphasize the consonants, like as I did. My days are swifter than the weaver's shuttle. So like swifter shuttle. If you do that, practice it. It actually puts a little bit of a music to it. And then make sure you drop your tone at the end. I shall not see happiness again. I always think of Eeyore on Winnie the Pooh. I shall not think of happiness again. Of course, you don't want to use that voice, but you end on the down note. A reading from the book of Job. Job spoke, saying, Is not man's life on earth a drudgery? Are not his days those of hirelings? He is a slave who longs for the shade, a hireling who waits for his wages. So I have been assigned months of misery, and troubled nights have been allotted to me. If in bed I say, when shall I arise? Then the night drags on. I'm filled with restlessness until the dawn. My days are swifter than the weaver's shuttle. They come to an end without hope. Remember that my life is like the wind. I shall not see happiness again. The word of the Lord. Moving on then to the book of Corinthians. The commentary at the bottom starts on page 54. Most of Paul's first letter to the Corinthians consists of teachings and exhortation to correct Corinthian misbelief and misbehavior. In today's reading, Paul changes focus as he writes about himself. Everything he says throughout this reading is in the person singular, in which Paul provides an emphatic, passionate explanation of his vocation. And I'll let you read the rest of that. So in this reading, you can look at the comments to the left over there, but it's a dialogue. You have to imagine that Paul is speaking to people. They're just I shall say often, but there are times when I hear readers who kind of go into what I call a reading mode, and they have about 5 pitches, and they speak those 5 pitches, and it's what they do when they're reading. But I really, and this is a reading, it is, but I want this to be more conversational, a little more natural than just reading. So what it would be is, if it was just reading, would be about like this, and I don't want to try to overemphasize it, but brothers and sisters, if I preach the gospel, there is no reason for me to boast, for an obligation has been imposed on me, and woe to me if I do not preach it. If I do so willingly, I have a recompense, but if unwillingly, then I have been entrusted with a stewardship. What then is my recompense? Etc. So that is just kind of a straight reading, but I want it to be more like a dialogue, like he's speaking. And the way you'll get to this point is if you practice it out loud, and actually if you can kind of memorize a few lines at a time and say them from memory, it'll make it come out more naturally. I'll give it a shot. A reading from the first letter of St. Paul to the Corinthians. Brothers and sisters, if I preach the gospel, there is no reason for me to boast, for an obligation has been imposed on me, and woe to me if I do not preach it. If I do so willingly, I have a recompense, but if unwillingly, then I have been entrusted with the stewardship. What then is my recompense? That when I preach, I offer the gospel free of charge, so as not to make full use of my right in the gospel. Although I am free in regard to all, I have made myself a slave to all, so as to win over as many as possible. To the weak, I become weak, to win over the weak. I have become all things to all, to save at least some. All this I do for the sake of the gospel, so that I too may have a share in it. The word of the Lord. The gospel reading here too, since you will not be proclaiming it, I'll just read it to you so that you can listen to it and internalize the words. You'll be prepared. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. On leaving the synagogue, Jesus entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Simon's mother-in-law lay sick with a fever. They immediately told him about her. He approached, grasped her hand, and helped her up. Then the fever left her, and she waited on them. When it was evening, after sunset, they brought to him all who were ill or possessed by demons. The whole town was gathered at the door. He cured many who were sick with various diseases, and he drove out demons, not permitting them to speak, because they knew him. Rising very early before dawn, he left and went off to a deserted place where he prayed. Simon and those who were with him pursued him, and on finding him said, "Everyone is looking for you." He told them, "Let us go on to the nearby villages, so that I may preach there also. For this purpose have I come." So he went to their synagogues, preaching and driving out demons throughout the whole of Galilee. The Gospel of the Lord. It's Super Bowl Sunday. I kind of played around with the idea of maybe doing On Eagle's Wings, or maybe the 5th verse from America the Beautiful, "Oh, beautiful for Patriots' dream," but I thought that was really kind of silly. Anyway, regardless of whoever you are for the Super Bowl, I hope if you do watch it that you have a good time, and please try to spend some time with these readings as much as you can. Sorry that it's so late this week. I'll try to be more on track next week. Thanks. God bless.